This is The Balance Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura, Carlin.
And I'm Christie, Derrico. At The Balance Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
Are you having trouble concentrating or sleeping? Is your phone the last thing you look at before you go to bed and when you wake up? And if it is, and it probably is, then maybe it's time to consider a digital detox. Now, most of the discussion around the effect of our devices and social media has focused on children, and rightly so. But not surprisingly, adults are affected too. After all, how do you put down your phone when you're expected to be connected 24/7 in today's world? Our guest is an expert in how technology is affecting our lives and what we can and should do about it. Dr. Gwenyth Jackaway was a professor at Fordham University for 25 years, focusing on the role and effect of media and technology in society. A media historian, Dr. Jackaway earned her bachelor's degree from Columbia University and a master's and Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Jackaway also trained in mindfulness meditation in Tibet House in New York City and as a digital wellness educator through the Digital Wellness Institute. And now she's put it all together in her new venture, a pivot of sorts, to help all of us deal with digital distractions and be more present in our lives. And we welcome you to The Balance Dilemma.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Gwenyth, why don't you tell us about your new endeavor and how that began?
Well, first of all, thank you for making time to meet with me, and it's a pleasure to be here. Greetings to your listeners and viewers. My journey to this field and to this area of interest has been actually gradual. Everything has stories. So as a graduate student, I was especially interested in the impact of new media on the human experience. And when I say new media, I mean communication technologies. So everything from writing to the internet. We have this amazing ability to communicate with one another and share the contents of our minds. And over the millennia, we continue to invent new machines that allow us to do that in new ways. And new technologies bring with them both benefits and drawbacks. And I've long been interested in the ways in which societies change when we have a new way to communicate, and some of the things that get disrupted, and some of the new opportunities. When I was, let's see. I think the story I would like to begin with is about 15 years ago now, riding on the subways of New York City, I started to notice that everyone was looking down at screens. And I noticed that for a couple of different reasons. As a communication historian, I was interested, this is new human behavior in public. Now, of course, it's long been common to see people reading books in public, but now here's all of these people looking at screens. And as someone who's been meditating for many years, what struck me was, we're now all doing a screen meditation. And so I started to get interested in the way in which our attention gets captured by media devices in public, and the issue of human attention, which up until then I hadn't really thought deeply about. I was mostly focused on technology, and then I started to realize, there's something going on inside as well, because attention is something that we can choose to focus. It's both voluntary and involuntary. So if someone broke into the studio with a big loud sound, our nervous systems are wired in such that we would all look. But we can also choose. I can choose to attend to you. I can choose to attend to you. So our attention is somewhat voluntary. And by adding all these devices into our environment that have the sum of human knowledge available at any touch of a button, it's not surprising that we get distracted.
No doubt.
And then a few years later, as we were discussing, I had students telling me that they were deleting social media apps from their phones in order to study for their exams. And that really got my attention.
You called that an aha moment when you spoke with me.
Yeah, it definitely was an aha moment because I didn't realize how much students were struggling with the distraction of social media. And so it was at that point that I started to realize there's something here that we need to be talking about. A lot of people who are concerned about new technologies or digital distraction or social media focus on the content, and there's various kinds of content that we could be concerned about, from things about body image to hate speech, or the ways in which the news presents reality to us. But and all of those are very important topics. I'm interested, as someone interested in meditation, with something more basic, which is our cognitive focus.
So why couldn't people just say, okay, I'm not going to go on that now? What is it about the social media apps or other apps that we don't have that self-control?
So some of that has to do with how our brains are wired, and some of that has to do with the economics behind these platforms. And the folks who run all the various platforms, the social media platforms that are all created in Silicon Valley, they all have tapped into, the last 20 years of psychological research, and now we have all kinds of brain scans, and our new understanding of the human brain has made it very easy for people who want to grab our attention to get it, because there's various kinds of stimuli that we're very likely to pay attention to.
Addictive feeds, I think.
Well, that's what I was going to go to. Is that what you're talking about, addictive feeds?
Well, so I'm very cautious about using the term addiction, but I would certainly say distraction, compelling. As you and your listeners are probably all aware, these platforms are designed with algorithms included. So algorithms are, small computer programs that are basically, they track what we do online, and then they learn about what we're interested in, and they give us more of that. So you've probably all had that experience of, you decide you're going to shop for a new pair of boots, and you're scanning, and you haven't made a choice yet, but you've looked at a few, and the next time you open up your phone or you open up your computer, there are the boots in all of your ad feeds. Now, that's not an accident, and that's how the economics of the platform work. So the more you use the platform, you're teaching the platform what you're interested in, and then every time you open it up, it's full of stuff you're interested in. Of course, it's hard to look away. Then there's other reasons that we get distracted. We get distracted from the inside. So probably had the experience of you working on a project, you have something to do for work. It requires focus and concentration, and you get a little tired, or you get a little bored, or it gets hard and you need a break, and often and right at our fingertips. And you've got all of the windows open on the top of your computer screen. So as soon as you want a little break, there's stuff there that's very compelling. It's customized for your interest. Of course, we're engaged by it. We're also human. We're very social creatures, and social media connects us to other people. And in terms of evolutionarily, the people who are well connected are the ones who survive, right? You've got to be connected to your tribe. And social media gives us a lot of feedback about our standing with our tribe, with all the likes and hearts and reshares.
Yeah, there was a Black Mirror episode where they put your score on the top of your head. But it's not just that we're discussing this distraction. There's actually a physical reaction, which can be anxiety and other issues that are related to this. And Jonathan Haidt has recently published this book, The Anxious Generation. And would you agree that these algorithms, the response that we get from the social media, can lead to things like anxiety?
So it's complicated, of course. I'm well familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work, and I have great respect for it. Making a cause-effect diagnosis is complicated, and anxiety is a medical, terminology, but certainly stress. So, having lots of input coming at us, especially many different inputs from different channels, that's distracting. Distraction can be stressful. And if lots of people want our attention, that can be stressful. How many likes have you gotten? That can be stressful. Not everyone gets anxious. There are certain personality types that may be more disposed to anxiety, and then different kinds of environmental stimuli can trigger it. But certainly, and there's many reasons that young people are anxious today. I don't think it's quite fair to put all the blame on the technology, but this is a very powerful force in our environment now. And none of us were raised learning how to use these things intentionally and consciously. And all of us who are parents, we didn't grow up with these technologies, and we didn't watch our parents parent about how to use these devices, so we're all learning together.
Well, this brings us to your topic, which is digital wellness. And how can we have digital wellness with these enticing forces around us?
Or how can we have digital wellness with digital distraction?
That's right. Well said.
Great questions. So first, let's try to unpack the concept of digital wellness or digital well-being. So this is a new field. And as I mentioned, it can be called digital wellness or well-being. And I've heard people say tech-life balance. It's a field that's sort of in search of a name, but it's very clear that we all need some training in how to make healthy choices now that we've added these devices into our lives. The genie's out of the bottle. We can't make it go away, and in fact, we can all predict more technologies are coming. We don't know what they're going to be like, but none of these devices were here 20 years ago, which is kind of amazing, except for the internet. And so who knows what's coming? But what we can do is start to learn how to make balanced choices. You're talking about the balance dilemma. So anything out of balance can be stressful. We've long lived with sugar, alcohol, and various other kinds of temptations in our environment. And if you are living a balanced life, you know that excess in any number of areas can get one into trouble. And so this is a force in our life that can bring a great deal of good, connection, and access to information, and it can be useful for students and professionals and for our social lives. But because it's so compelling and can take up so much of our time and be so distracting, we need to learn some internal
So tell us what to do. Tell us what to do. You've given some of these examples to me offline. So I pick up my phone and I mean to look at the weather, and I am searching news feeds. How can one be more mindful in using technology?
Great. Well, thank you for bringing up mindfulness. So I'm going to give a twofold answer, but since you gave me the prompt about mindfulness, I think it's good to begin there. So I'm sure that it's no surprise to your listeners that the term mindfulness and mindfulness education has really spread throughout Western culture over the last few decades. These are practices that are thousands of years old, that were developed in another culture where there was no technology. So I think it's important to remember that human beings have been working on focusing our attention for a long time. We are easily distractible creatures. And mindfulness, which comes from Buddhist traditions as well as some others, is about actually getting present, right? Just this moment, right here, right now. Now, for a lot of Americans and people living in what we think of as the West, even slowing down that much to just be here and breathe can make a lot of us anxious. Like, well, can we get to the point, right? No, the point is actually be present. And when you pick up your phone with one intent and you find yourself somewhere else, then it means you have gone into mindless use of your phone rather than mindful. So what I would say in terms of that particular example is state your intention to yourself. You can speak it out loud or say it inside, like, I am picking up my phone to check the weather. Then do that and put it down. Now, if you're with other people, it can be helpful to say it out loud, because if you go off down the rabbit hole, they can say, where'd you go? But stating your intention before, at least making it clear to yourself. What am I doing here? Why am I picking up the phone? A lot of times we do it mindlessly. So you have a couple of moments while you're waiting for something to begin. You're standing in line at the bank. You're standing in line at the grocery store. You're sitting in a studio waiting for something to begin, and you have a few moments. It can be uncomfortable to sit with ourselves, and that's part of why we pick up our phones.
But how is that different than saying, okay, I'm not going to check Instagram today? where you've made an intention, I'm not going to check it. How is that different?
Well, ultimately, it isn't. It's about how long you're practicing the self-discipline. So the first example was I'm practicing the self-discipline for 30 seconds. I'm going to check the weather and put it down. Not checking Instagram the whole day is going to take another level of self-discipline. And part of the way I like to think about this is, we've probably all been on diets of some form or another, even if it's not to lose weight, just to change something about how you're eating. It's hard to diet in the middle of a grocery store or in an ice cream store, right? And
in an ice cream store.
In an ice cream store where there's all of this tempting stuff. And these devices are full of all kinds of tempting stuff. And part of the answer now to your question is we need some other priorities that also matter to us. And of course, we do have them. We have jobs, we have families, we have relationships, we have our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with our bodies and all of those things. You talk about the balance dilemma. We need to keep all of those things in balance.
A lot of our jobs require being on our devices, our phones, and particularly even in social media apps. How do you reconcile that?
So the digital wellness movement has many components, and I have colleagues in this field who are focused on bringing digital well-being into the workplace. I'm more focused on working with parents and students, but digital wellness in the workplace, of course, is essential. So if one's boss is online 24 hours a day and you get emails from your boss at 2 in the morning, are you allowed to wait until 7 a.m. to respond? These are corporate culture decisions, and it's not the technology ultimately that's pressuring us. It's our social relationships and the expectations in the work environment. In France, apparently, they have this do not disturb rule or do not.
You're not supposed to email after hours.
That's right. And years ago, when I was at Fordham, I had a department chair, and she came in and created a rule that we would not have weekend emails. Faculty members are usually working at all hours, and that was a new thing for us, and it was great. Nothing after 5. But that has to be something that a corporation or a work environment makes.
Well, I want to go back to something. So we were talking about, okay, if I pick up my device and I make an affirmation, I say, I am going to check the weather, and I check the weather. Is there a retention to this exercise? Or as Maura said, if you say, I'm not going to check Instagram for the day, is there a benefit to doing those exercises that's long-term, or is it something that you have to renew all the time to constantly make this new affirmation to set limits?
Well, first of all, I would use the word intention. Slightly different than affirmation, right? Because at least my understanding of the word affirmation is kind of like you're setting a mindset, like I will be strong or I will be self-confident. This is a little bit different. It's behavioral, like I will not eat sugar or I will check my phone in a certain way. So it's an intention, and I want to talk about intentional attention, which I think is ultimately the answer. Our attentional resources are things that we can train. So we've trained ourselves to constantly seek new information all the time. Oh, what's happening? What's happening? We're scanning our environment, which is actually something that our ancestors needed to do in the wild, right? Is there a bear? Is there a wolf? Is there a lion? Is there a warring tribe coming after me? Fortunately, many of us don't have to worry about some of those threats, but we're constantly monitoring our environment. So your desire to check the weather is a piece of that. What's going to happen in my environment, and how will it impact my experience? Do I need an umbrella, or will it be cold, right? So we can train ourselves to focus for longer. And that's part of what meditation can do. And that's part of what setting these kinds of behavioral intentions. You can set a timer. I will not check my phone for fill in the blank. For some people, 5 minutes might be long. For our teenagers, it would be long.
I will note we've already gone about 40 minutes from the time we got in the studio without any of us checking our phones.
Right. And are you feeling it?
No.
Okay. So we can train our attentional habits to learn to go for longer and longer without interruption. Now, the thing about interruptions is they can come from the outside or the inside. It's easy to blame the outside forces, the phone, the beeps, the buzzing, the kid who runs in the room, the loud sounds, but we often self-interrupt. And that's the other issue. And when we have digital technologies in our environment that are so tantalizing and we don't feel like doing the thing we're supposed to do, then we go off into digital distraction.
There was a recent Wall Street Journal article where the writer gave up her digital device for Lent. And it worked. She felt great. But when Lent was over, everything went right back to the way it was before. And so is that effect fleeting if you don't continue it?
Sure.
I mean, I always thought that you needed a certain period of time to create a new habit.
That's right.
And I would have thought that that was a sufficient amount of time, but it didn't create the habit. So why, and is there something different about this?
Well, it's true that it does take a certain amount of time to create a new habit, but you also have to have a strong motivation to keep going. Right? So if it's, if you think about Lent as 40 days or however long it is, if your intention is at the end of it, you're going to go back to life as it was, then that's what you would do. And maybe you'll get a few insights during that time. But in order to gain the benefits, you need to keep it going. And so, half of this is about habit formation and commitment to our long-term vision and our long-term goals. Now, one of the things that I like to suggest to people is at the end of our lives, we're not going to say, oh, I wish I'd spent more time on my phone. When your kids graduate and walk out the door, and, you're probably not going to say, oh, I wish I'd spent more of their childhood or their teen years on my device, right? I mean, life is fleeting. We're all old enough to know how quickly the years go by. And our attention, where we put our attention, it adds up to what our life is. Right? Where you put your attention over and over and over and over again, that's what your life is about. So, I encourage people to look at their screen time at the end of each day.
Keep track of it. Is there an amount of time that is okay?
Oh, that's completely up to one's life. Right? I mean, you think about what did you used to do? What did we used to do with those many hours a day?
Well, they used to say more than 2 hours a day of television.
Right. This isn't a new discussion if you think back a generation
that's right. The
to the
boob
effects of
tube
television.
was another. But I think what we're discussing here is so going on cold turkey and not using your phone for 40 days or technology for 40 days is one thing, but implementing habits and rituals that you can use every day and that can give you a better quality of life.
And that continue.
That's right. So what are things that we can do? For example, not having your phone in your bedroom. I try to not have phones at meal times with everyone. So you are engaged and discussing what other things can people do, or what do you recommend so that there's a better quality of life and it's sustainable?
Great. Well, I think the sustainability is key. And some of it also has to do with the social environment that you're in. So one of the things that I really like about Jonathan Haidt's work about, he's a social psychologist, so he thinks about group behavior. And we, as a society, are making up the rules for how to use these devices. I believe that one day, taking out your phone at a restaurant is going to be as rude as lighting up a cigarette in a restaurant. And we all remember when that was normal behavior, and now it isn't. So and he's really focused on, like all parents in a school making agreement that nobody will give their kids phones. Social support can help. So, and I'm not going to talk more about the collective decisions, but even in your family or among your friend group, if you make an agreement, let's all try to be present today. Let's put our phones in the middle of the table so that we can all be with each other. Model that with your family, model that with your partner, model that with your friends, model it to yourself. Very few of us spend time just alone with ourselves, with our own thoughts.
That's a really hard thing to do sometimes, just to sit and say, right. I'm going to be bored for 30 minutes and not, sit in the doctor's office and just think rather than scroll.
Yeah, right. So it's about being present with yourself, which doesn't have to be boring. In fact, it can be quite powerful. But I want to answer your question a little bit more. One of the first things I recommend to everyone is turn off your notifications. Mm-hmm. If your screen is covered with little messages about what's happening in the world or on your social media devices, or if you're getting messages from your apps that you need to practice Duolingo, or turn all those off. what I recommend is put something on your phone screen. I mean, many people have photographs of their friends and family, and that's all lovely. You can also put a quote or a message to yourself that says something like, be present, or even a question, why are you picking up this phone? I mean, you can...
That's great.
Right? Turn off all your notifications, visual and auditory. I guarantee you all the messages will be there when you open up your platforms. But stop the external distraction. And that means making a commitment to yourself that you're going to be present and do one thing at a time. And so I want to talk about multitasking because the issue of digital distraction is linked, sadly, to some other aspects of our society. And one is capitalism and the intense pressure to maximize our productivity and our time use. So we have this illusion that doing more things at the same time is going to somehow stave off, the ongoing threat that we're going to run out of time. So if you're not familiar with Oliver Berkman's work about time use, I highly recommend it. Just begin from accepting that you'll never get everything done on your to-do list. Life is too short to accomplish everything, and so being present is actually one of the best ways that we can really get the most out of our lives and get the most done. Multitasking is not a thing that the human brain can do very well. That's a term that comes from computer science. And computers can multiply work on, and it's called parallel processing. Computers can do all kinds of things simultaneously. The human brain can't really do that, particularly for work that many of us are engaged in that takes high cognitive load. Now, you can listen to a podcast while jogging. Those are two very different sorts of activities. Or, read and ride on a walk on a treadmill. But trying to toggle between two different activities that take a lot of cognition, you're not really doing them simultaneously. You're switching. And each time you switch, there's a cost to switching, and actually productivity goes down, and you're not concentrated as fully on any one thing. You're giving everything sort of shallow attention. So I also recommend monotasking. Just do one thing at a time.
Like set a time limit for these 20 minutes, I'm going to do this.
If setting a timer helps you stay focused, great. But I'm also just practicing it when I'll catch myself. I'll start a project. I'm unloading the dishwasher. And then I remember something, and then I go off into, pick up my computer, and I haven't finished the dishwasher. And just do one thing at a time. And when you do the next thing, then you get to the next thing. And then you have less stress and chaos in your environment, and you're actually showing up for each thing you're doing and each person that you're talking to.
All right, so those are a few. Any others you could think of that?
Well, sure. So get the phones away from your pillow.
Right.
Even if you can't bring yourself to put it on the other, even on the other side of the room, or oh my goodness, in another room altogether, at least not right next to your head. So that the last thing you do and the first thing you do is engage with the contents of someone else's brain.
Even if it's checking the news, which you might otherwise do by listening to the radio or turning on the television to find out what happened overnight.
No, I don't agree that starting your day with news is a good idea.
I would agree.
Why?
Well, first of all, I think it's essential to begin the day disconnecting to yourself. How's your body? How are you feeling? How did you sleep? Is anything hurting? We're all at that age where you wake up and suddenly you have a mysterious something that's hurting. Or just like tuning into, how does it look outside today? How do I feel? I have a whole practice where I'm not allowed to check the news till I've had my tea and I meditate. Because taking in the events of outside in the world before I've connected to myself means I begin the day by absorbing what is often bad news, because the way the journalism industry works is that bad news sells. You're not going to turn on the news and hear, people fell in love today and it was sunny out. That's not newsworthy, right? If it bleeds, it leads, and bad news sells. So by definition, turning on the news is not going to be a happy experience, and I don't think it's the best way to begin the day.
I will not sleep with my phone too close to my head, and I will not start or end the day with the news. Anything else?
Well, and as an extension of that, so before headed to bed, that means don't check the news right before you go to sleep, because whatever you're doing right before you go to sleep, when you lay down in bed, that's what's going to be on your mind. So I recommend turning off all media, whatever, at least 20 minutes before you go to bed, and ideally before that, so that you begin and end the day with your own thoughts, or connecting with the person that you live with, or your animal. Or
I have a friend who does 2 hours before bed. No technology. Yes. A former guest on this show.
I always did that with the kids.
Right.
And but they have not followed through on that. Let me put it that way. I keep hearing people, particularly young people, talking about actually wanting to get rid of their devices or downgrade to something called a lights phone, which only has an alarm, a calculator, calendar, directory, directions, hotspot, music, notes, voice memo, podcast, or timer. But
Sounds
none
like
of
a
the
lot
other
of distraction to
Yeah,
me.
well, but for them, this is a major downshift. What do you think about that?
I think that any sorts of changes that people can make that allow them to have more control over where they're putting their attention, these are great things, right? So if people find that helpful, that's wonderful. The reality is that in our contemporary lives, going completely tech-free is very hard to sustain. So it's great for a weekend or a vacation, or many people send their kids off to camp where their technology is taken away, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to reconnect with our minds without all of this input. And those kinds of tech breaks can give you insights about other ways to live. And then you can incorporate those insights as you come back online.
I want to do a little switch about the effect on our children when we're on our phones all the time.
This is very important. So we know that kids thrive with adults' attention, and the more adults look away, eventually kids find other ways to engage themselves. But the younger they are, the more they need our attention. And also, interestingly, as they get older, the teens need our attention too, even though they're ambivalent about it. But especially little children. Now, there are starting to be studies. This is all very new technology, and social science moves slowly, and it's not so easy to do controlled studies, but it's easy to witness. And if you go into a playground or in a museum, you can see it. All the parents are on their phones, or the babysitters are on their phones, and the kids are, wanting their adult attention. Eventually, they don't want our attention. When they're little, they do. And so they're wanting our attention, and we're not giving it because we're distracted.
Is there an emotional impact on the children?
Well, of course. I mean, it depends on the child, but they're looking, so they need a lot of mirroring and reciprocity. Mommy, look at this, and then you need to say, oh, wow, I see that, that's great. And if they're saying, mommy, look at this, and we're saying, hold on a minute, eventually they'll stop asking, right? And the other thing is we're modeling to them, this is normal behavior. And when we eventually give them a phone, of course they're going to imitate us. So one of the things, and I know that we're not here focusing on parents and kids, but for the parents in the audience, one of the best things you can do for your child is model healthy behavior with your technology, because as we all know, they watch us.
And I assume you don't think children should have phones, let's say, too early. Is there an age where you think it's okay?
So that's not my area of expertise, and I don't want to step outside of my lane. So I don't have an expertise in infant and toddler brain development.
Oh, I was talking about older.
Wait till eighth is a movement, and
there was a Connecticut middle school that took the phones away during the school day and found that was very helpful for their students. I didn't know if you had found that there was some guideline or age. We weren't talking about giving
I'm not an expert either, but I really loved the flip phone, and I did force my youngest one to use the flip phone to a certain point, and I also would use the flip phone as a punishment. And if the smartphone was taken away, they had to have the flip phone for a little bit. For whatever it was worth, but that worked for me. That's all I can say. But it's hard when there's peer pressure. That's really the thing.
I don't have a fixed age in mind, partly because kids differ widely, and what one kid needs, it's not appropriate for another one. So I think it's important for parents to know their kids. I think that taking phones away during the school day makes sense. As an educator, we can't learn if we're distracted. And that's true. It's also very distracting for the teachers. Now, of course, the teachers need to put their phones away in the schools as well. And I've spent some time in secondary ed schools recently, and all the teachers have their phones as well, so it's complicated because these devices permeate our society.
Let's talk about college, since you really do have experience there. I remember doing a college visit with my eldest and sitting in a class, observing a class. I'm sitting in the back, and every student was on Facebook during the lecture. I gather that's not uncommon, and I shouldn't have been surprised.
Well, now it would be very uncommon because college students are not on Facebook anymore. But yes,
well, that's
you're right.
true. That's absolutely right.
Right. So no, of course, it's quite common, and so I was at Fordham for over 25 years and watched as these technologies entered our classrooms. And I was a media professor, and my colleagues and I, of course, we talked about the media a lot. And so we had a whole faculty meeting, I remember once, about what should we do about these devices in the classroom? Should we ban them? Should we not? Should we problematize it and invite students to think about the presence of these devices? I had colleagues who took on a kind of parental role and said, I will take your phone away if I catch you. My feeling is, first of all, they're adults, they're old enough to vote, marry, and die for our country. So I don't think that just banning the technology is the answer, partly because then they don't learn the self-control skills. After college, they're going to go on to jobs where their phone is going to be sitting on their desk, and they need to learn that self-discipline. When you're in a class, you put your phone away.
I would completely agree with you. There was someone I met who told me he had the solution to this problem, and he would turn the internet off in the house, and it created all this control. So I was so amazed. I said, how old are your children? And his son was like 20. And I said, oh dear, that is failure, because if your 20-year-old can't self-regulate, and that's really what we're getting to for all of us,
that's right.
Not just children, how can we self-regulate so we can focus better, sleep better, and be more productive in what we want to do, because we're focusing on the things one at a time. That's really what we're talking about.
I couldn't agree more. Also, 20-year-olds usually know how to reset the internet. So
exactly right. You're asleep thinking it's off, and they've gotten another internet connection.
Right.
So I have to ask a question that we ask. One question that we ask all of our guests. If you had to give advice to your 25-year-old self, what would that be?
I assume in relation to this topic.
Oh, no, it could be anything. You
have more fun. That's the first thing
love
that comes to my mind, because when I was 25, I was busy getting my Ph.D. And there's things you can do at 25 that you can't at 45 or 55 or 65. And I was very focused, and I wish I'd taken more breaks and had more fun.
I like that.
And since this is the balance dilemma, we always ask whether can you have it all and all at the same time?
Oh, absolutely not. You can't. Of course you can't, because to have everything at its maximum, if you want to be excellent at parenting and excellent in your job and excellent in your relationship with yourself and excellent in your health, there's simply not enough hours in the day, and we don't live long enough to do all of that. So I think life is this whole process of making choices about your priorities, and that's why I've gotten so interested in attention, because it's like a flashlight in our mind. Where are you going to put your attention right now? Well,
I like that.
Learn how to do that on purpose. And we don't get taught about attention in our educational system. Children get taught meditation in other cultures. And it doesn't have to be spiritual or anything to do with religious traditions. It's a training of the brain. Where are we putting our mind? I don't remember ever being taught about that in our educational system. And yet, teachers are always saying, pay attention. What is that?
I do think it's changed. There's a lot more mindfulness in at least public schools.
And there
these
is
days.
one place that I would say mindfulness is the policy. Libraries. Quiet. You can have a computer, but you can't be chatting on the phone, and it is quiet, and I always think of libraries as a sanctuary. But Dr. Jackaway, I want to ask you, if our listeners want to connect and hear more about what you're doing, where can they find you?
So I have a couple of answers for that. First of all, they can find me on my website, which is my name, Gwenyth Jackaway, Ph.D., all together, .com. And you can find out the various things that I'm up to there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also there. And I wanted to let your listeners know that I'm also doing some work with Thrive Education, a marvelous bespoke education group that provides tutoring and other services for.
And the head, Jean Marie Stein, has been a guest on our show, as has Carrie Roberts, who works in college consulting for Thrive.
So I'm doing some collaboration with them, and we're going to be offering some programs for parents and students about intentional attention and how to achieve that kind of focus in this age of digital distraction, and in particular how that can help support learning and academic achievement.
And we'll include that in our show notes, and for future announcements, we'll have your future events, which we always want to promote.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. None of us have been on our phones this entire time. Our iPads are simply for following our notes for this.
For our script.
And before we close, I just also want to thank LMC Media for the use of this studio. It was recorded at the studio on Mamaroneck Avenue in Mamaroneck, and it is available for others to use. You can go to lmcmedia.org for more information, and it is a nonprofit organization. So if you would like to donate, it's lmcmedia.org/donate.
Please follow us, listen to us, and rate us on our platforms, Spotify, Apple, and our website, thebalanceddilemma.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter and email us your suggestions. There's no cost, but it means a lot to us.